You're listening to Story Struck. I'm Rachel, an editor and writing coach.
And I'm Nino, a ghostwriter and book coach. Welcome to our curious community where we dive into everything books and writing.
Now, let's get into the episode.
Okay, welcome everyone to today's podcast. Today we have the lovely Michael Burke, who has a new anthology of novellas coming out called Sinister Society, 6 novellas of secrets and horror from Ruidon Books. It's coming out on December 9th, so should be out pretty soon based on when we're recording in the past. So based on when this is supposed to come out, it should be coming out right around the corner. So Michael, you want to talk to us a little bit about your Sinister Society and like how you came to develop this in like a novella style?
Yeah, sure. First off, I'm like beyond thrilled to be a part of this project from Ruidon and have a novella alongside the 5 other authors who are all incredible. There's Cindy O'Quinn, Tom Deedy, Eric Nunnally, Mercedes Murdoch Yardley, and Sarah Reed. And Lynn Hansen is the cover artist, and she's a powerhouse illustrator in the horror world. And Linda Hartley.
Show us that cover because it is really awesome.
No, I loved it.
Come a little bit closer to the middle there. No, the other way. To your left. Your left.
That's what I'm blocking my own screen.
Yeah. So if you put it in front of your face, everyone will be able to see it on the clip. But okay. There we go. Yay! Yes, we got it. Amazing. That looks so cool. Okay, continue. Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's all right. I was, and Linda Hartley's the editor, and she was, at least on my end, and I think everyone else, she was phenomenal to work with. I loved working with her and intend to do so again. Richard Wood is the publisher of Ruidon, and he put this idea together, and yeah, it's great. The Secret Society theme was very cool. I know when he talked to me about it, my mind was firing on all cylinders, and I had an original idea to write that I just started for what is in the anthology. My story is about my great-grandmother who was feminist before feminists were like in the parlance of the culture. She was just this badass who did her own thing. She emigrated to America from Portugal, like under an assumed identity, was a bootlegger, and that's where my story takes place during her time as a bootlegger. You know, I changed some facts around, you know, like she was a bootlegger in New Hampshire, I believe, but I set my tale in Cleveland. So I weave fact and, you know, historical fact and fiction with aspects of my great-grandmother's life.
Oh, that sounds so cool.
That is just a really neat take on it. I also have a family member who was a bootlegger who died under very suspicious circumstances, and then the sheriff married his wife. So some strange things back then in the bootlegging era. So I cannot wait to read that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. It is. So because, as you can see from behind me, I'm a big comic geek. I got started on that path when, as a little kid, you know, like 3 years old, crawling around in the back of my parents' closet, I found a shoebox full of old paperback books. It was my dad's from when he was in the service, and they were old pulp books, you know, like Tarzan, Conan, Doc Savage. And I thought the covers were fascinating. Like, they just blew my young mind. And when I opened the books it was just a bunch of squiggly black lines on white paper, and I didn't know what it was and what's happening. Why are the monsters, attacking this guy or what have you? And I wanted to know, and both my parents fostered that curiosity at a young age, and got me a comic book and started teaching me to read, but I was too damn impatient to wait for my dad to come home from work, or my mom to not pay attention to my baby sisters instead of me and tell me how to read. So I just taught myself.
Love that. I remember, let me rewind. My brain is moving faster than my mouth. And growing up, I had a friend who really struggled to read, and her parents got her into manga, or allowed her to read manga. And they're like, hey, as long as you're reading, I don't care what you read, just read. And that's where she started, was with manga. And before I knew it, she was reading Pride and Prejudice, which I still can't read because the English translation and stuff, I can listen to it all day long. I think it's like poetry. It's beautiful, but doesn't mean I am registering what's going on. But she started with manga. We both really had a lot of learning difficulties, a lot of learning disabilities and stuff. And so, but she started with comic books, and that opened the door for her to read all of these things, and she became quite the talented writer as well. And so when my son, just really same thing, really kind of struggles with his attention span with reading, he started reading manga books, and I'm like, okay, let's go, you pick whatever you want, go for it. And we were at the bookstore the other day, and this guy was just like, kudos to you for supporting this. I'm like, hey, I'm just happy he's reading,
Yeah.
because it opens doors. It's approachable, it's entertaining, and it starts leading you towards oh, this is what books can do. So yeah, do you find that those comic books were that real big starting point for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was so impatient that I remember distinctly looking at a comic page, and I thought it was like a jigsaw puzzle, and I had to put, the images in order, still realizing at that early stage that they already were in a storytelling order, but because I couldn't know all the words yet, that's where my mind went, trying to piece it together to the story that was in my brain. And I always had a dictionary next to me too, where
So,
if I ran across a word that I didn't understand, I'd just, I'd look it up, by just matching the things. I was really young. I was 3.
wow.
Uh,
Okay, 3 with a dictionary, holy moly, you were dedicated.
I was a quiet kid because most of my time was spent with a nose in a book, because I'm like, I don't know what this word is. And I would look at the dictionary as much as I was looking at the comic book, because I didn't know what word I was looking up. So I was playing, I was matching them together. And then
That's
I find it.
amazing.
And, it just was a rabbit hole, because then the definition would have words I didn't understand. And then you're just flipping pages left and right. Eventually I got there.
So, I don't know how early in your life you knew that you wanted to be a writer, and I'm curious when you were looking at those and you didn't quite know what the words were yet, were you ever making up your own stories in your head when you were looking at those?
As a youngster,
Yeah, or later on in life. I just feel like I'm very visual, so when I see those types of things, it gets my mind going with, ooh, maybe it's this story, maybe it's that story, and making up stories in my head.
I think once I had a grasp of reading, and that was from the comics, a Spider-Man comic specifically, and I still have that very same copy. Just it's tattered and just 50 years old,
Well
and
loved.
I'm super nostalgic. You might, yeah. Yeah. Once I mastered the reading the comic book, I jumped right into my dad's shoebox of books. Because that was my driving force. And then once I read a few of those, with those dictionary jumps, because now there's even more words, and I started picturing things in my head from the words I was reading. Those pulps are very lurid, a lot of purple prose, so it just inspires images in your head. And that is, to your question, where I started picturing things in my head. And once I finished that first book, I believe it was a Conan the Barbarian one. I started thinking of my own stories and wanting to write them. And I think by the time second, third grade, I was writing in my lined paper notebook, just making up stories, usually just things of me and my classmates, a bunch of 8-year-olds fighting monsters or aliens and by that point, Star Wars had hit the theaters. So then just the imagination exploded. And I would say from that point on, I've been a writer, but not serious about it just because of my ADHD. Like I could never finish anything.
And I think that,
No, that's like such a thing. That's such a struggle for us to be like, we get really pumped about that initial inspiration of things. We start and then like we fizzle off, like the dopamine comes down. What was your secret to finishing a book? Because I know that is a big struggle for a lot of writers, especially neurodivergent writers. What was your turning point to be like, okay, now we're finishing shit?
So I was diagnosed finally with ADHD when I was 47. I slipped through the cracks in the 70s, 80s,
Both of us are late in life diagnoses, so you got to figure out your own way.
Yeah. And because you have focus issues, I know when I was younger, I was labeled troublemaker, not performing to my potential, or sometimes just considered outright stupid or dumb. But that's not the case. I mean, because you have ADHD doesn't mean you're not intelligent. Anyone with ADHD is very intelligent. Your brain just works differently.
Yeah, we say in our house that our ADHD is our superpower.
Yeah, I mean, I've always gotten pumped, like you said, about starting projects my whole young life and into adulthood, but I would fizzle out. And at the point I got diagnosed, I had left the job, had a hard time finding a new one, had bought a house with my wife, and it was great because I took point on doing the supervising of like just contractors coming in doing work. But then when all that was done and I still couldn't find a day job, I started getting depressed, and to the point where I went to talk to somebody about my depression, and then that's where we discovered I might have ADHD, and took the test, got the diagnosis. And when I got the diagnosis, it was like I was like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense when he finally realizes he's a ghost. And I was like, oh my God, like my whole life.
It's like someone just gave you the keys to your brain, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God. Now I know how to combat why I couldn't finish anything in my life. So that was 2017. By 2018, I started a writing group with the very selfish intent to hold myself accountable to regular writing on a monthly basis. And I got some people to be in it, and it was an appointment, and I have to keep an appointment. So I learned a lot from that. I had the writing group for a few years. I was already friends with several people in the horror writing community. So I would always go to the events. Like I met you, Nino, at Spooktastic.
That was awesome.
Spooktastic was great. Yeah, and just talked with my fellow horror writers and learn from them. If they had workshops or something, I would attend and just tried my very best to forge genuine connections with the community. And in the meantime, I was writing to open calls and learning the business and to the best of my ability and trying to learn with each rejection that I got. And all that finally got me published in 2021. And then it's like a door opens and then another acceptance happens and then another. You let the rejections roll off your back unless somebody makes it personal. There have been a couple rejections that were really personal and they sting. And it's like, man, why can't you be a little professional about that? Then I feel like I'm backsliding and the ADHD rears its head. And then you're like, I'm an imposter. And what am I doing? I'm not as popular as this person or that person. And it's a spiral. But then you shake yourself out of it. But it's a process.
It definitely is. Yeah. And getting that feedback is so tough. And I love that you had this amazing experience with this most recent anthology with an amazing editor, because having that connection with an editor that you really vibe with gives feedback in the way that you like to receive it and is helping to make your book the best thing it is. Like, that is the ideal editor, the ideal way to get feedback. And those rejection letters where either it's boilerplate and it's nothing, that isn't necessarily helpful. But then when you get those ones that are hurtful, that is not helpful. It's damaging. So that's where it's great to have your writer community and friends that you can, you know, go back and, tap into them and be like, dude, I'm having a moment because like this is what this person said. And they'd be like, yeah, that's bullshit. Like, let's toss that out. So I'm curious to know, like, were these things that you were getting published in for the open calls, was that for like short stories and novellas as well?
So I made a conscious decision once I knew I could write without a lack of focus. I'm like, great. I needed to, once I had the diagnosis of ADHD, then I developed behaviors and routines to get things done. So I still put in time at the comic shop I co-own. So I write on the days that I don't work there.
Mm-hmm.
It's my schedule. I only write 3 days a week. I tried different things. I'm like a time limit. I'm like, I'm going to write for 8 hours. That's a lot. Let me write for 6. Then it just like, let me just go to word count. If I can get 1,000 words a day, that's great. Sometimes 1,000 words takes 8 hours. Sometimes it takes 40 minutes. It just depends where, what I'm writing and where my vibe is. So to that end, I'm like, I will do short stories. I do not have it in me to do a novel. I'm just keeping in mind my limitations. I'm like, that's a lot of focus and attention. So short stories is what I set out to do. Like 3,000 to 4,000 word stories. And I've got a couple dozen of those out there. And then Richard Wood, the publisher of Ruodon, he had published with Crystal Lake a few years ago, and they started this project of novellas where there's 3 linked novellas per book, and each book is different. Like one might be horror, the next one will be science fiction, and the other one could be grief horror or, what have you. And so Crystal Lake's publisher just took their stable and said, let us know if you're interested and invite anyone you want. So Richard invited me to be part of that. I've met with Crystal Lake's publisher and he was a super nice guy. And then I invited my friend Jim Moore, who I believe Trish Wooldridge mentioned him in her episode with you guys. He was a beloved member of the community up here. He's always been a big proponent of sitting in the chair and writing, and he was a personal friend and mentor to me. So I wanted to give back, and I invited him. He accepted, and we did a weird Western theme. And that was my first novella. That was the longest thing I had written to date, and that was 3 years ago that came out. And I was just like, geez. I'm like, it took half the year to write one story. And it was very research driven, which was triggering for my ADHD because I'd go down this rabbit hole. I'm like, well, I want to be accurate, fascinating. And then like my day off was spent reading about something, adjacent to what I need to write because I'm just fascinated and I'm taking notes. And yeah, my work desk is a nightmare. It looks like my brain.
That's so relatable. I'm writing a book series that's based around Norse mythology.
Okay.
And the amount of because my Norse mythology was Marvel. So I had nothing to go off of except for that. I'm like, no, well, it's got to be based on the actual mythology. So I started down this rabbit hole of like learning about, because Loki's the center of it. And so I'm like trying to learn everything. And I'm like, keep going down rabbit holes. I'm like, oh, I gotta discover more about this. I'm sure this will apply to the book somehow. And eventually it does. Like legit, the amount of time that we go on like, side quests is crazy. But I think, your story illustrates like everything you're telling us about your neurodivergent experience as a writer. It really illustrates that as neurodivergent people, like so much, we have to our experience is a little bit more trial by fire. The way that we see everything written, because like Ray Bradbury talks about writing every single day. Anne Lamott talks about writing every single day. And it's like, that's great if you have those spoons. But most of us neurodivergent people don't have the spoons for that. And we need to find our way of doing it. And when we have this like narrative that goes around the writer scene that says, oh, you have to write every day, you have to write this many words every day, you should do it first thing in the morning, and it doesn't work for us, and we have to find our routine. That's why Rachel and I talk a lot about developing your writing routine, because that feeds your brain and how your brain best works. And so your writing routine was on your days off and with a target. And then the other thing we talk about a lot, which you mentioned, was the importance of having people by your side with it, that accountability, the mentorship, the friends along the way. Like as neurodivergent people, we need other people because we have so many loud voices in our head telling neurodivergent people have more, Daniel Amen. He talks in his books about ADHD a lot about how we have like 4 times as many negative things that we're told, like negative enforcement, or negative reinforcement, whatever, than a neurotypical. And then we have this thing called rejection sensitivity disorder that a lot of neurodivergent people have, where we're preparing for rejection. We're preparing for the hurt before we've even started the process. And so, that's things that we have to combat by ourselves all the time. But when we have people in community, especially people who also have some sort of neurospice, it helps us to get over those hurdles. So thank you for telling that about your journey and stuff, because I think that it's important for us to see writers of different flavors, who have different journeys. And it's part of why Rachel and I wanted to start this podcast, because we're both neurodivergent. We both have a non-typical story of how we got to writing. Every time I talk to Rachel, she's like, oh yeah, I did that too one time, because she has literally done everything. And so, it's so nice to hear, because, I have an associate's degree in physical therapy. Like, I don't have a fancy education. I couldn't read until I was like 11 years old. So like, there's a lot of things where I compare myself to other writers and I'm like, who am I to write? I could barely even read. I never read Chronicles of Narnia like all of the other kids. I've, read one classic book in my whole life. Like, who am I to be doing this? And seeing other people who have this funny journey, is helpful for me. So I'm hoping that it's also very helpful for other listeners out there.
Yeah. I think I'll also try to own it and talk about it as much as I can because it cements it for me. I've spent the majority of my life before realizing what my neurospice was. I love that term. Deflecting, hiding behind some kind of wall, anything to divert attention away from why I was a troublemaker or dumb or, just different. So it's very easy to slip back into all those learned behaviors. So me talking about my ADHD keeps bringing it home to me, and then it's more real, it's concrete, and I can continue to battle it because it's a creeping vine for me. It's like if I don't prune it by talking about it, then it's just going to grow, and then I might backslide into the way I was when I was 22 or 12 and just take a big step backwards. And I'm sure there are some people in my life that, maybe are inwardly rolling their eyes because they're like, oh, here he goes talking about that again. There's a part of my brain that's like, oh, I know they've heard this before, but I can't help it. I have to own my shit. I'm like, if they're my friend, then they're just gonna have to suck it up. And if they're not, then I don't know.
Then they should be celebrating you, not just tolerating you.
Yes. And I think as a psychologist in the room, I'll say it's definitely it's validating to finally have that diagnosis and to know that you're not the troublemaker, you're not these labels that you were given, and then to be able to basically take that power back, right? And now that it's not me, it's this thing, you know how to work with that in your life, and you're able to build those routines, build all of that to go forward. And like I've spoken at summits and things before, and there have been people in the feeds and emailing me like, I really wish we heard from people who had, some kind of neurodivergent, or they have chronic health issues, they have this, they have that. And I'm like, you've heard from a lot of those people. They just haven't said it. I'm like, like I didn't mention it in my talk that like I have high masking autism. Like that's not something I mentioned. A lot of people in my life, if they watch this, they know now. But a lot of people in my life don't know that because they look at me and they're like, well, you don't have that. There's nothing wrong with you. You're intelligent. You're this, you're that. And I'm like, no, I've been masking that my entire life. And it's very exhausting. And now I'm finally like, okay, if people are feeling like they don't have that, then I'm going to be open with that and say, yes, this is what's going on. And we are surrounded by those people. You are not alone. And the advice that we're given for writing may not work for you, and that's fine. And it may take folks like us longer to do things, or we have to alter how we do it. And that doesn't mean we're doing it wrong. So I'd love to circle back kind of how you were saying you found that writing shorter really worked for you. And I feel like when we were growing up, there was a lot of short, like we were saying, like comic books. You used to be able to get those even at like the gas stations, like everywhere you could find the short stuff. And then it teetered away. And like comic books and manga, I think is kind of newer, or at least for my rural area, the past like 20 years maybe. But I feel like short kind of went away, where we used to have even short in like magazines. You would get the magazine every month and you would hear like the next installment in the story. And I think now we're seeing more of a resurgence of writing short. So there's like in Amazon, they have, and now my brain's going to totally flake on what it's called, but they have like a whole thing that's just for like these short reads and things like that. And serialized fiction, I think, is getting popular again. And that makes me think of like the novelized version of comic or manga with like these serialized fiction and things like that. And I just think it's so fascinating to see all of that come back. And especially in our world where we're used to like quick attention span is shorter, just in general, not even for folks like us, but just in general. And I just think it's really fun to see that popping up and being popular. And with the advent of self-publishing, we're getting to see that even more as well. Because like I love cozy mysteries, and now there's like a whole subset of cozy mystery that are novella length or kind of between a short story and a novella, and people are just ravenous for it. And it blows my mind that they can write that story short, because I think writing shorter can sometimes be harder. So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on how you see, short writing versus longer books, especially with owning Colleen and comic book store.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think there's a lot to unpack there. So me personally, I grew up reading serialized fiction and or consuming it. I mean, it wasn't just reading it. It was also like both of my parents are geeks. That like my dad has always been a big reader. Um, and my mom, not so much a reader, although now in her late 70s, she's coming around to reading because she wants to read what I put out there. One of my sisters is a self-published author, and she's written like a trilogy. So my mom's reading, and now she's like, I just read 1984. And she's like, there's so much happening in the world now that's like this. And I'm like,
Yes.
well, Mom, let's sit down. And like my mom liked, I would watch the old Creature double feature with my mom Saturdays. And my mom loved Westerns, which was basically just formulaic serialized fiction, just
Yep.
Lone Ranger. I love Lone Ranger. It's serialized fiction is in my DNA, and I love it. And having a comic shop and having a really diverse staff, across all columns, like there's staff there that's more than like half my age, they're 25, is fascinating to me because they're a generation plus removed and they like what they like. I'm open to what they like. I'm not just locked into my generation and what I liked. Seeing like that pop culture landscape of having a comic book shop, you get to see, if you like remove yourself a little, how things move in cycles. Like Star Wars is a great example, just because it's generational and it's not going away ever. Like I was there when it started, but there's been two whole like Star Wars chunks, that are that generation Star Wars, and they're not for me anymore. But that doesn't mean they're not as valid as the Star Wars that I grew up with. So I've seen, like, I remember when Star Wars was nothing until the prequels came along. And then I'm like, look at that resurgence and just the attention and the focus and all of that on Star Wars and what's related. And then like the little rabbit holes that spin off that too. They're like, oh, I like science fiction now. And it's like copycats come in, that want to create their own big splash on the tail of Star Wars. Seeing that attention and, it's all just really interesting how it's cyclical. And it's kind of frightening to me that I've been around long enough to see the wheel turn that much.
Well, and it's really interesting because like you talked about Star Wars, and that made me think about like how certain things come back around, but with a new flavor, right? And how the next generation is, they take something, right, like the like a short something, like a short fiction or whatever, and then they add their own kind of like flavor to it. So it's like taking something and evolving it within the cycle. And I think about my nephew. I'm going to call him my nephew. He wrote our intro and outro music. Micah, shout out to you. We're just calling him my nephew. He's my niece's partner, and he can talk about Andor. Like, the love this guy has for Andor is just so amazing. And he's talking about all these things. And it's so interesting because what he's taking from it, some of the older Star Wars fans are like shitting on it. Yeah. And so we have to identify that when we're consuming something or when we're creating something that is, a new generation's thing, like this is their generation's classic. And you have to have that level of respect for this new innovation of it, and try and learn from it. Like, it's an opportunity for growth. So as short fiction becomes a more popular thing again, because our collective attention spans are not so great, and we're able to then see these innovations from this next generation on like what they're doing with it, right? Like, are they bringing in more aspects of mental health? Are they bringing in more nuance of character because they're so tired of the flat characters? Like, growing up, we had villains who were just flat villains, like, oh, this villain is just straight up evil. But now our villains have more nuance to it because this next generation is just not excited by a flat villain. They don't see things in black and white. They see things in more nuance, and that makes our storytelling more rich. So that just came into my brain.
And things fly into my brain.
Rachel keeps us on track here.
And I think, to your point, the nuanced, aspect of characters and storytelling is definitely true, but I also think it's always been there, but just not in the quantity that it is now, or that they're like the creator or the author, maybe their reach exceeded their grasp and they just didn't have the sophistication or knowledge yet, because it was also something new that was happening, so there wasn't a lot there. It puts me in mind of a comic book character that has mental health problems that debuted in the late 70s in 1980. His name was Moon Knight.
Moonlight.
Yeah, there was that Disney show which did some.
That's the only reference I have.
Yeah, but he was a comic character from way back, and they basically just said he was a split personality.
Right.
That really.
So you would love this.
It wasn't. Like, it was more, they just didn't have the wherewithal and understanding of that particular mental health problem.
Right. But then.
To write
Yeah, but then in the show, they were able to take the updated information on DID and apply it to where Moon Knight is actually a great representation for people who struggle with DID versus
didn't exist when he was created.
Exactly. That term, it was split personality disorder, and now it's DID, dissociative identity disorder. And so, but usually, right? Usually when we see DID in things, it's in a villainous way, like in Split, and it's not actually representing the experience of somebody with DID. And Moon Knight is such a great way of portraying it and making them like, oh, your DID is hard, and it's it's definitely something that you struggle with, but it's also your superpower. And I love the change in the narrative with that. And you're right, like that type of thing, it started back in the 70s and stuff, but we didn't have that language, and now we do, and now it can evolve. Sorry, I interrupted you again. I got very excited.
It's all good. I can move on tangents. Sometimes I just have a tough time finding my way back.
Right.
That's why we have.
So as we circle back, Is there anything that you would like to share with us about the upcoming anthology, kind of as we're wrapping up, or where folks can find you or your store?
Yeah, my shop is Kamikaze. It's in Davis Square in Somerville, Mass. In 2 weeks, we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary. Thank you. We'll have a big bash at the VFW in Davis Square. It's free. Anyone can come on down and say, "Hey, thanks for being around." And for the anthology, let me do it right this time, and I'll go without fumbling.
Perfect. First time. Look at you.
I learned. Yeah, that comes out December 9th. I'm super excited. Pre-orders for it are live on the ruodon.com. And
Put that link below for anyone who needs it.
the first 250 pre-orders will get 6 art cards.
Oh.
And if you order off the site, it's a sale price of $17.49 for the book. Yeah, each novella has one image to it, interior art, to kind of kick off the story, and the publisher made art cards.
That's so cool.
And the artist is Kip Ayers. And we all got to choose which image from our novella we wanted to have illustrated. Yeah, when we saw them, I know I was blown away, and I think I was talking to Eric Nunnally, who's in it, and he was at Spooktastic right across the aisle from me where I met you. And I'm just like, can you believe how incredible these images are? And he's like, oh my God.
Oh.
Yeah, so the first 250 pre-orders will get those art cards, and I'll be at Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival this coming Saturday.
Yeah, probably going to have this released in November. Listeners will probably miss that, but we'll definitely have all your information linked down below, the link to get your anthology and links to your social and all that stuff, so everyone can follow along. And then if anyone's around Somerville, they can drop by your comic shop. But yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on.
You
Well,
did
that's okay. You can come back
fabulous.
anytime in practice. Yes, so everything will be linked down below. Be sure to go check him out, check out his wonderful works, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening. Check out the show notes for details and links from the episode. And don't forget to subscribe and follow for more. Special thanks to our composer, Micah Silverstein. Enjoy the rest of the music.